So do you remember in the New Testament when the Apostle Paul warned us to not get involved in stupid and foolish controversies because they lead to quarrels? Well, I might be getting into one right now. So on the Dox Lodge today, I want to talk about a doxological issue that has been breeding debate and controversy among Christian musicians for years now, at least since 2004. And it is not the hymns versus contemporary debate. It is not sloppy wet versus unforeseen kiss. It is not reckless love in general. It's in 6/8, not 4/4. But the issue at hand is, what key is Revelation's song really in? So ever since Jenny Lee Riddle dared to write something that went beyond the typical convention for praise and worship songs, the church has not been able to handle it. We've been debating amongst ourselves, in worship practice, on the forums and Facebook groups, and we have just not been able to come to a common understanding of what key Revelation's song really is in. Well, here at the Dox Lodge, we're going to get to the bottom of this issue. Now, for the purposes of this video, we're just going to use D as our home base. Almost every time that I've ever played this song in church, it's been in the key of D. Because, I mean, come on, can you really do it in another key? So there are three doxological positions that you can take on this issue. Number one is the key of D. Number two, the key of G. And number three, D Mixolydian. So let's keep going together, and we're going to go through all of these arguments, and we're going to find out what key is Revelation's song really in. So the first of our doxological views is that the song is in the key of D. Now I can certainly understand why someone would think that this is in the key of D. After all, D is our starting chord, and after it goes through the entire progression, it inevitably lands right back on D, and in most cases you would end the song in D to achieve a sense of finality. So why isn't it in D? Well, I'm glad you asked. You see, the key of D has two sharps in that key signature, F sharp and C sharp. But if you look at all the notes in this song, only one note is sharped, F sharp. The other note that would be sharped, C sharp, is actually a C natural. That means it's neither sharp, it's neither flat, but it's regular old C. So that presents some problems for us. If I was going to tell someone to just jam out in the key of D, and you played this song the way it's normally done, there would be some quite interesting notes in there, to say the least. In order to make this song really in the key of D, you would need to take every single C that appears in this song, whether it's part of the melody, whether it's part of the chord, and change all those C's to C sharps. Curious to what that would sound like? Well, I'm so glad you're curious, because this is what it sounds like in the actual key of D. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, holy, holy is He. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, was and is to come. I think I'm gonna be sick. Alright, so now that I've recovered from my DZs... Alright. Anyways, now that I've recovered from whatever that was, we can get on with it. So you might have heard that and said, yeah, that's what it really sounds like, but what does the sheet music actually say? Well, you bring up a legitimate point, so let's look at the sheet music. Oh, what do you know? The key signature is the key of D. Now wait a minute. Before you get all high and mighty and do your victory lap against me, let's take a look at it, shall we? If you look through the sheet music over here, even though the key signature says D major, look at all the notes in the song. Every single C that you see, I know these puns are just getting, but that was unintentional, I promise. Every C that you visualize has a natural sign next to it. So that means that is changing it from otherwise being a sharp to being natural. Sheet music can present something in a ton of different ways and yet still end up sounding the same. For that matter, you could say that the time signature of this song is an alternating 5/4 to 3/4. Or you could just sharp every B in the song and just say that all the C's in this song are really B sharp. And so you could make the sheet music look any number of ways, but yet it would still come out sounding the same. So this is one of those instances where you really have to trust your ears more than your eyes.
Your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them.
So that seems a little tedious for me and a little bit redundant. It seems like you might as well just change the key signature. Which leads us to the key of G view. Now in this view, it simply states that this song is in the key of G, because every note that we've taken from this song perfectly lines up in the key signature of G, which has only one sharp instead of two. So that means that every melody note is going to be unchanged. Every note in the chords are going to be unchanged. So, what's the matter? It is misleading to say that Revelation's song is in the key of G. Even though we've got the right selection of notes and everything, it just doesn't feel like G. I don't know how else to describe that, but it's just not right. And let's demonstrate right here. So follow along with me here. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. You see what I mean, though? Even though we ended on that G, which in the key of G would be considered the 1 chord, it just didn't feel like it was done. It felt like it needed to go somewhere. And so we went from G to D. Now if we're using D as kind of the 1 as our home base, then we have what we call a plagal cadence or an amen cadence. This is a 4-to-1 resolution. And it's called the amen cadence because at the end of a lot of like Bach chorales or hymns, at the very end you'd have all the choir singing Amen. And so you get that kind of sound, as opposed to the more common perfect cadence, which sounds like this. So in the key of D, that would be like an A or an A7 to D, 5-to-1. And the plagal cadence has a little bit edgier of a sound. It's still strong, but it's not as definitive as the perfect cadence. It kind of has that same tension that you get out of a sus chord. Like if we were going to do that same thing like this. D sus 4 to D. Got the resolving suspended fourth to a third, as opposed to the 5-to-1, which has that 7th leading tone resolving up to the 1. So before we establish that it's not in the key of D, because there are some crucial notes that we have in this key right here that are not in the actual key of D, and now we're finding out that G is not the star player of the team, but rather D is. And so then this leads us to the D Mixolydian view. So what is Mixolydian anyway? To answer this, let's go back to the previous view that we just learned about. Now this view, remember, that states that this song is in the key of G major. But wait, I thought that we decided it wasn't. Hang on, we're getting there. So we're going to take this view, but we're going to take the key signature of G. We established that that is correct, but yet it's not quite G. So, getting back onto modes, let's lay out the G major scale in front of us in one octave. All right, so we see that selection of notes. So let's try this. Instead of going from G to G, let's start on the next note up, which would be A. And instead of ending on the high G, let's end on the A above that. And so voila, we get the exact same note selections, but it's starting and ending on a different note. This would be the second mode of the G major scale, in this case called A Dorian. So you could do the same thing with B and C and get those modes too. But we're going to go all the way up to D, in which case we get D Mixolydian. D Mixolydian is the fifth mode of the G major scale. So D Mixolydian is essentially a D major scale, but with the flatted seventh. If you remember whenever we were talking about those cadences, you remember the 5 to 1, it has that seventh to 1. And that seventh, that's really a key part of the regular major scale. Whereas the D Mixolydian has the flat seventh. So let me play you the differences here. So here's D major. And here is D Mixolydian. So I don't know if you can tell by the scales alone, but major has kind of a bright, happy sound. You know, we're all used to that. Mixolydian, on the other hand, it's also happy, it's cheerful sounding, but it's a little bit darker. It's got more of an edge to it. Let me play you a few things that use the D major scale, and then a few things that use the D Mixolydian mode. So here we go. Alright, so you can tell that the Mixolydian, it's just got a little bit more oomph to it than the regular major scale. And so I think whenever Jenny Lee Riddle was sitting down to write Revelation Song, she was thinking to herself, you know, regular major just isn't epic enough. We gotta flat that seventh. And so that was probably the revelation that came to her. Alright, but I had to do that one. Okay. But you get the idea. See, the cool thing with this view is that you get an accurate representation of what all the notes and chords are, and you also know what note everything is centered off of. Yeah, I know that some of you are going to say, there's no key of D Mixolydian. Yeah, I get that. And you would be technically correct. There is no key signature that is D Mixolydian, because that would just be the key of G. But you can say that the tonality of the song is D Mixolydian. You see, this beats having to say, this is in the key of D. Well, except that the seventh is actually flat. Or say, well, we know it's in the key of G, except that we're actually not basing it around G at all. Instead, you can say, this is in the tonality, or key if you prefer to use that term, of D Mixolydian. Right away, you know all the notes that are being used in the song, and you know which note or chord is the star of the show. So therefore, I have come to believe, according to my musical convictions, or doxological convictions, that Revelation song is in the tonality of D Mixolydian. So what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have an alternate view that I haven't explored? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give a thumbs up and hit subscribe below to keep up with our content. Well, I hope you guys have a great day. Good luck next time you do this song in your set. And we will see you back here next time at the Doc's Lodge. Lord bless.